All right, we are going live in different places. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are about to kick this sucker off. What's going on? Let's do it. If you see the graphic, that is a lot of the only clips from Dog Soldiers we can show, so we don't get a copyright strike for showing stuff. And this is me. Hold on, I got to turn that off. Hello, I am Scott Sigler, New York Times bestselling author, all-around fun guy, and the host of the brand new show, Monster of the Week. Today, we have one of my favorite people on. We're going to have Jonathan Maberry, who literally wrote the book on monsters 3 times and then has written a bunch of fiction books on monsters as well. We're going to be talking to Jonathan about the movie Dog Soldiers, the werewolves in Dog Soldiers. We're also going to be talking to him about his new book, Relentless, which is out in stores now and has come out just banging. My most recent book is Mount Fitzroy, which is book 2 in the Sun Symbol series. It is out in audio now from Audible only, and it will be out in print, ebook, and other audio formats on December 3rd, 2021. Let's see, almost without further ado, let's go to show you guys what I've got coming up for you. If you're watching now, here are the guests that are coming up on the next show. On the 23rd, screenwriter Danny Bilson, the guy who wrote The Rocketeer, is going to be on to discuss his favorite villain, the 1940s movie villain, The Creep. On the 30th, we're going to have Delilah Dawson, noted Star Wars author. Her favorite is Gamork from The Never-Ending Story. Then on this August 6th, novelist Nicholas Sansbury Smith, who's going to do the original Terminator. Not all the Terminators have followed, only the Terminator from the original James Cameron movie. And then on the 13th, actress Rachel True will be talking with me about The Thing, the John Carpenter version. So that is all the stuff that is coming up. But right now, let's make sure I get him unmuted. Trying to figure out how to work the mute button, you guys. Bring on our awesome guest, Mr. Jonathan Maberry. Jonathan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott. Glad to be here, and congratulations on the new show. It's going to be fun.
It's super exciting. I was hoping we could get you on the show as the first guest, because I'm just going to run people through the stuff that you do a little bit. So obviously, I have a picture of Dog Soldiers up on the screen. We're going to be talking about Relentless in a moment, but let's take a quick look at all the stuff. They Bite, Endless Cravings of Supernatural Predators by Jonathan Maberry. Vampire Universe by Jonathan Maberry. These are all nonfiction works and of course, Zombie CSU. I'm sure there are some that I have missed, but all of these books are what make Jonathan a noted authority in the world of monsters. And since this show is about monsters, we had to have him on first. Jonathan, really quick, before we get into Relentless, get into Dog Soldiers, can you give us a quick overview of your nonfiction monster writing career?
Okay, well, I actually started writing nonfiction books on monsters with a book written under a pen name of Shane MacDougall. My publisher at the time was afraid that after writing a bunch of martial arts books that my readers would think I'd gone crazy if I started writing about vampires. So
okay.
I did a pen name book called The Vampire Slayer's Field Guide to the Undead. It came out in 1999, I think. And then in the mid 2000s, I did a series of 5 books for Citadel. I did Vampire Universe, Cryptopedia, Zombie CSU, They Bite, and Wanted Undead or Alive. And each one tackles a different aspect of supernatural folklore, except for Zombie CSU, which really focuses on the pop culture of it.
Gotcha. Now, let's, before we get into Dog Soldiers, I got Relentless up on the screen. This, of course, is your exceptionally popular series, Joe Ledger. It's a new Joe Ledger series. Give us a quick overview of this one so people know what they have to go get as soon as they're done with this show.
Well, Joe Ledger's a psychologically compromised character to begin with, a spec ops soldier with a very, very damaged past. And up till now, he's just been managing those different aspects of his shattered psyche.
Okay.
Something happens at the end of the last book, Rage, that pushes him way over into the darkness, and he becomes a kind of a super predator, going after the bad guys, but also crossing some lines. So it's him fighting for his soul as well as trying to save the good guys from a terrible catastrophe that's on its way. And it's the 12th book in the overall series, and I'm absolutely delighted that it's gotten such strong reception from
Mhm.
everyone. It hit a whole bunch of #1 lists.
Wonderful. Congratulations on that. And in
Thank
this
you.
one, he, if depending on which side of the fence you were on, he's kind of a monster unto himself. If you're a bad guy,
He is.
he's coming to get you. All right, so now let's talk about Dog Soldiers. Jonathan picked the first monster we're going to talk about, the werewolves from Dog Soldiers. Before I give people the synopsis of the movie, tell us why you picked this particular werewolf out of all the werewolves that are available.
Well, it's the first time that I've personally seen a werewolf movie where they hunt in packs and where they use the human edge of their intelligence to help with the werewolf or the wolf lupine edge of their intelligence. So you really see the combination of the animal's pack behavior and instincts and the human calculation and manipulation,
Okay.
creating a new take on the threat of werewolves. And it's so fascinating, and it has nice twists and turns all the way up to the end.
Let's go. For those of you who have not seen this movie, you should get yourself a beverage of choice. Kick back. Make sure it's dark out. Kick back when it's dark.
Yeah.
It's an indie movie. We're going to cover a couple details on it real quick. But here's the basic synopsis of the movie if you haven't seen it. A British squad is sent on a training mission in the Highlands of Scotland against Special Operations Squad. Ignoring the childish campfire stories heard about the area, they continue with their mission and come across the bloody remains of the Special Ops Squad, and a fierce howling is piercing the night sky. With two mortally wounded men, they make an escape, running into a zoologist by the name of Megan, who knows exactly what hunts them. What began as what they thought was a training mission turns into a battle for their lives against the most unlikely enemies they would have expected, werewolves. So this movie, of course, it's an indie horror movie, was a budget of $2.5 million, which wasn't bad for 2002 when it came out. Not bad at all. It wound up making $5 million, so I think everybody was pretty happy with it. It was written and directed by Neil Marshall, who went on to direct The Descent, Doomsday, episodes of Black Sails, episodes of Game of Thrones, Constantine, Hannibal, and God, I can't remember what I wrote there. And then most recently, he directed the Hellboy reboot, which didn't do very well in the box office. But this was his big start. What did you like about Neil Marshall's directorial and screenwriting approach to this?
Well, it was his first movie too, which I think is a great, right out of the gate thing. It's all character development. Every single character, even the ones that are semi-peripheral, have an arc to them, have a personality to them. It's a character drama rather than an event drama. So you have these people who you bond with, you relate to, and then you see them in a situation that is going beyond their experience, and you see what happens to those personality types under pressure. Who emerges as strong? Who, sometimes it's a surprising character that emerges as strong. Who winds up not being trustworthy or not being as strong. It's really fascinating all the way through, and the characters, even though they are fighting a monster and have to rise to be somewhat heroic, are very believable. They're real people caught in a crisis. And that appeals to me in the strongest way, because with all my thrillers, I tend to write character-driven thrillers rather than event-driven thrillers.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite character in the movie?
Spoon is always a big character, but the sergeant, really, I think his name was Wells in the book.
Yeah, Sean Pertwee.
Yeah, Sean Pertwee played him, and I always liked him as an actor. I've met him a few times. I met his dad, who was it his uncle? I forget which, was the third Doctor Who, John Pertwee.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. It's awesome.
Yeah, and really nice guy, very down to earth, and he plays a character that could be a kind of a one-note typical sergeant.
Okay.
He gives it all sorts of nuance, humor, as well as pathos, and has a really great final scene in the movie. So he's my favorite of the bunch, but Spoon is a close second because he has some of the best lines, and he's kind of like that character is what would fit really well into a movie like Attack the Block, where it's just basically blue collar people up against monsters, and don't mess with the blue collar guy. He's gonna swing some punches.
Yeah, that's a kind of a special combination there. When you get the regular Joes fighting up against the monsters. Now, this movie is categorized in a lot of lists as a black comedy or a horror comedy, and there's definitely some lighthearted elements to it. Do you feel that is a good fit for it, that it's a horror comedy?
Well, I don't consider it a comedy so much as an action thriller with humor lines at exactly the right point to break the tension, because if the tension runs too high too long, that one note becomes tedious. But if you break the tension, it has that that little moment of comedy, which I don't think should define the genre it's in, each moment of comedy breaks the tension and then sets you up for the next punch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, really clever writing. And different characters have different lines that give different tones and flavor to the comedy. I mean, the lines that Harry G. Wells, by the way, Sean Pertwee's character, H.G. Wells, the lines that he has are funny in their own way. The lines that Darren Moffat has, a spoon, are different. Even some of the dry comedy that is used by Leon Cunningham, who plays the bad guy, Captain Ryan. They're comedy of different types, but the movie is definitely not a comedy. I disagree with that interpretation.
Okay.
And I've heard it before, but I disagree with it.
It's definitely got some lighthearted elements. What is it? Spoon's great. As a Spoon, it was like when he's about to get eaten, is like, I hope I give you the shits, and tons of lines like that. But do you think this is any kind of a kindred spirit to American Werewolf in London, or things that were also very severe but had those lighthearted elements?
Yeah, they're definitely in a zone. And I don't consider American Werewolf in London as a comedy either, though it, again, uses comedy effectively. And it's different than with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where it is more of a comedy, and there's drama. The comedy sets up the drama. Here, the comedy allows the drama to hit its highest points without, again, being that even plane. American Werewolf in London does the same thing. There are some tragic moments in that, some horrific moments, but also the comedy is necessary because we're looking at a guy turning into a wolf. I mean, there's a bit of absurdity in that, and by having the comedy, especially in American Werewolf, they're acknowledging how ridiculous this is. But then they say, "Yeah, ridiculous, but guess what? We're gonna do some real harm here," and that's sophisticated and clever storytelling.
It's almost like with both of those movies, they're using the comedy to sort of lure you in and make you relax. And it's it's like a jab, and then once it goes to the really, like that third act in both of those movies, and especially in Dog Soldiers, there's not a lot of comedy going on in there. They've got the lighthearted stuff, but then things get really, really gory and really gross.
And very and also heartbreaking too, because there are characters you become emotionally invested in who don't make it to the final act.
That's one thing that Dog Soldiers did really well. It's it's kind of classic last man, last woman standing type horror, and they used a lot of elements that you have to do as a first-time filmmaker almost always. So let's talk about that a little bit. A $2.5 million budget in an era where they weren't using CGI. So you have to think a lot of that budget went to the werewolves themselves. I mean, to make a werewolf movie just on that budget alone, you are very, very challenged. What were your thoughts on the special effects and how they did with the werewolves themselves?
Well, it's interesting. The werewolves visually are really beautiful, and they hired dancers and mimes and so on to be the werewolves. So they had this beautiful artistic movement that worked for the type of creatures they were. You didn't see much in the way of a transformation sequence. You saw some, but the budget wasn't there for the really big Rick Baker type of, bladders under the skin and full out American Werewolf change. So there are times the werewolves, like the faces, don't move as fluidly as they would in, say, American Werewolf. But you can forgive it because they don't linger on that. They linger more on the ominousness of the movement. There's a couple of scenes where you see the werewolves standing up, and they're silhouetted by the moon or by like misty light, and it's a terrifying scene. I saw it on the big screen originally. It's a terrifying scene, and it sells the werewolf thing. And also their movement through the woods sell it. The fact that you don't see that much of the werewolves makes it more effective because it keeps you constantly guessing where it's going to go next. And I think that was really smart. And for the budget they had for special effects, I mean, their entire movie budget was smaller than the special effects budget for a movie like Van Helsing, which used CGI and so on, and didn't get scary. The werewolves in that werewolves not scary. These were scary.
It's almost like they hit that same lucky problem, if you will. If they start out with movie Alien, and Ridley Scott, a lot of the shots of the alien looked horrible. So the studio's like, just cut that stuff out, and that absence made it super scary. Jaws, you don't see the creature until the end. And Dog Soldiers, it's almost like directorial, and Marshall's like, that does not look good. Let's just coat that in shadow, put him in the back, put him behind the mist, and it just helps make things much more solid.
Yeah, and in fact, sometimes a big budget is a detriment to a good horror film. We've seen that too often. Anytime they start doing special effects like CGI over monsters,
Hmm.
it stops being scary. I don't think I've ever been scared by a CGI version of a monster, but I've had some real jolts from practical effects. Whether it's American Werewolf, The Howling had some really great moments.
Yeah, it
Ginger
did.
Snaps, of course, Dog Soldiers had some fantastic moments, but they're very minimalist in the way they show the monster,
Hmm.
and that works really well. It's practicality and smart filmmaking kind of married together. Like, for example, taking a zombie film, if George Romero had a huge budget for Night of the Living Dead, I
Hmm.
doubt people would remember that movie.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
would that lean documentary feel, which a lot of people thought was intentional, was budget necessary. He had no
Hmm.
money.
It's got to be interesting to be the directors of those movies and think you're compromising your vision, and then to find out that that compromise in particular is one of the things that that help makes it pretty good. Now, I want to get your thoughts. Some of the kill scenes in Dog Soldiers are gripping because the werewolves are almost cat-like in their execution. They play with their prey and are very
Yes.
slow about it. How did that strike you? What are your thoughts about how they took their time with their human prey?
Well, this is again where I see the combination of the human versus animal. Wolves are not evil. If they kill, they're doing it to survive.
Hmm.
These werewolves have the human quality of evil, which I ascribe as a human quality, not an animal quality.
Hmm.
So what we're seeing is human evil, human maliciousness laid over the pack behavior of wolves.
Okay.
That's monster right there. That's monster. That's the kind of monster I really love. And they did that in this film in a way that I've never seen before. They are playing with their enemies. They could take the enemy anytime they wanted to, but they don't, because the thrill of the hunt that appeals to the human side of them
Hmm.
is being satisfied by the terror that they're engendering in the characters, whereas the actual kill is just the wolf part needing to feed, and
Hmm.
it's the least important part of that because they will be able to feed.
Yep.
But they need that adrenaline rush, that emotional, maybe even sexual rush of complete control over something else that is afraid of it. It's very much a rapist point of view in a way,
Yes, it
because
is.
you have that same vicious desire to completely control something else and to feed off its fear.
And I'm a little fuzzy on some of the details of the movie. How many were the starting werewolves? Were they soldiers or were they locals who had taken out soldiers? How many soldiers?
Locals.
They were locals.
They're the family that lived in the house. The story
Okay.
took place in.
Okay.
So they're actually not soldiers. The only soldier werewolf that we see is one of the bad guys. There's a group of special ops guys who are kind of assholes. The leader of that group becomes a werewolf, and he's definitely a bad guy. And we're rooting for him to get killed even more than the other werewolves because he's such an asshole. He's a monster even before he became a supernatural monster.
And it's so much of this movie is constrained by the budget, constrained by Neil Marshall. Like, tried to write a screenplay that somebody would actually fund, so he couldn't make it that expensive. And part of that is the isolation. The isolation of that farmhouse is, and you've worked in screenplays, this, like that setup to limit the number of outside influence is a key part of writing to the budget, but they did it really, really well to make you feel trapped.
It's similar to the way they do what's called bottle episodes in TV. If you have a budget shortfall in a season, do an episode where there's no guest stars, no special effects, everyone's trapped in a room. The turbo lift isn't working and they're trapped in that, or something is going on where they're trapped in a room and they're dealing with personality clashes and aberrant behavior and whatever, and that amps up the tension. It's all character. It's actors love that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading an interview or seeing an interview years ago with Kevin McKidd, who plays the main character Cooper, talking about how he and the other actors spent so much time basically alone. They even camped out together to get into the feel of being the soldiers. So when they're trapped in the house, it was like a bunch of soldiers trapped in that house.
Yeah.
They even sometimes slept on set overnight to stay in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
And you can feel that claustrophobia, but also that shared, friends in trouble sort of mode. And that really sells it. You believe that this is a bunch of guys who like each other and who are afraid of dying together and, are seeing the tragedy of one
Right.
after the other friend go.
And that you've got
It's great.
Neil's directing there, and the acting, everything works out pretty good. Got a couple of questions from people in Facebook when I posted it. People were super excited that you were going to be on the show. First question from Jason Russell: what would you want in a sequel if you were to see a sequel from Dog Soldiers?
Oh man, pretty much a new cast of characters with maybe Kevin McKidd's Cooper being some sort of a wannabe Van Helsing and maybe failing completely at it. I think that'd be kind of fun. I wouldn't want him at this point to step in to be the action hero, because even when at the end of the film, when they showed a newspaper and talked about, werewolves ate my platoon or ate my squad, it's the second story under, the World Cup story.
Yeah.
So people clearly didn't believe him. So I'd like to see him kind of as a side character. They set up a sequel. When the female werewolf cuts her hand on the glass, they set up the sequel dealing with DNA and weaponizing werewolves, and that's where I'd like it to go. Mm-hmm. Because of that, it actually inspired one of my stories called Three Guys Walk Into a Bar, where my Joe Ledger character, my werewolf character, Sam Hunter, who's in a series of werewolf short stories I do, and a couple other characters are up against essentially bioengineered werewolf soldiers.
Okay.
And that was inspired by having watched Dog Soldiers and seeing that clear setup for what could have been or should have been the sequel. But since they never made the sequel and have no plans now of making one, I decided to write an unofficial sequel in spirit.
Nice. And I didn't have this graphic, but you brought your first bestseller, which is a werewolf book.
Yeah, and I was actually talking about werewolf movies on Facebook like years ago, 2009, and the assistant to the licensing director, VP of licensing at Universal, happened to be following that conversation on Facebook. Huh. Next day, I get a call from this VP saying, "Hey, we're remaking The Wolfman with Benicio del Toro, Anthony Hopkins, and Emily Blunt.
Yep.
You have any interest in writing the book?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So I wound up writing it, and the movie had some troubles. Unfortunately, the book was my first bestseller, and it did really, really well. And I had a blast writing that.
Must have been fun. One line from that movie has stuck with me. It was in the trailers, and it was so good that when Benicio del Toro strapped down, like, "I will kill all of you," you're like, "Oh, that's going to go south in a big hurry." And since you are kind of an expert in the world of werewolves, Dennis Crosby asked, what would you like to see in a werewolf movie or show that either hasn't been represented yet or has been done so poorly there's no decent representation of that element?
I would like to see, there's a folkloric werewolf. I've written a lot about the different werewolf species in folklore. Every country that has werewolf legends, they're different from each other, right?
Okay.
So my favorite is among the Livonian peoples of Europe, a belief that in certain families that they at night would become werewolves and descend either into hell or go out hunting in the woods to find evil and destroy it. So they were good guy werewolves. They were known as the Benindante, the good walkers.
Wow.
And there was even one of these guys named Tice who was arrested by the Inquisition and tortured to try to get him to admit that he was not fighting on the side of heaven, that he was really, an apostate of hell. They couldn't break him. And, the Inquisition tried pretty hard to do that sort of stuff.
They were good at breaking people.
Yeah, and they couldn't break him. So they finally said that there's no way that he could survive this enhanced interrogation, I suppose it is, without having been protected by the power of God. They gave him the nickname of the Hound of God, and they let him go. And I thought, that is the coolest friggin' thing I've ever heard.
How is that not a movie yet? That's incredible. Good guy werewolves.
I really want to write that movie. And if somebody else writes it, I'm going to buy the first ticket to see it.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Another question, let's see, again from Jason Russell. For you, where do these werewolves rank for you compared to other TV shows and movies with werewolves, like the werewolves themselves?
For me, the scariest werewolf is in The Howling. The one played by, what's his name? Robert Picardo.
Okay.
He went on to be in Star Trek. He was the hologram doctor, but he was a werewolf, kind of werewolf serial killer in The Howling, and he was scary as hell. His transformation was terrifying.
Yeah.
The murders he does is terrifying. So that is my favorite. On the next, in terms of scary werewolves, the Dog Soldier werewolves, they're scary as a pack, and they're kind of beautiful in some of the shots we talked about earlier.
Yep.
As far as where I would rank it, it's my favorite werewolf film. but I think the Howling Werewolves are scarier. I do like the werewolves, or the thought that they're fighting werewolves in a movie called The Brotherhood of the Wolf.
Oh
Turns
my
out to
God.
be a
Love
different type
that
of monster.
movie. Love that movie.
But that is such a great werewolf film, even though the monster is not a werewolf.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is every other aspect a superb werewolf film.
Oh, that is, if you guys have not seen Brotherhood of the Wolf, it is a, French Renaissance karate monster movie. I've never seen anything like it. It is absolutely spectacular, and the end special effects just will completely blow you out of the water. That's one of my favorites. My scariest monster werewolf is the young lady from Ginger Snaps, because you've got somebody who is, with our culture, the very definition of harmless. Like, this is the person who is prey, who is not the predator in almost all situations, and yet she winds up capitalizing on teen angst in a very different way.
Yeah, and that whole series, there's I think three or four, but I know at least 3 Ginger Snaps film. They're good, and each one's different. They don't try to redo the same formula.
I didn't watch 2 and 3 because I was like, I don't want to have my heart broken, because I thought 1 was such an incredible lower budget movie. They did such a good job, and you're telling me 2 and 3 are still good.
They're not as good as the first one. The first one is almost perfect.
Yeah,
I mean it's in the top 5, always will be. The third one is interesting, the historical one, where their ancestors turn out were werewolves. So it's been in the blood essentially. But also one of my favorite werewolf films. Not a lot of people talk about it anymore, and the werewolf effects were only mediocre. But Jack Nicholson, Wolf, I love that film.
Yep.
He and James Spader as rival werewolves, fighting over Michelle Pfeiffer. It also is a really good satire about the attempt of male dominance, the self-justification for male dominance.
Another question coming out of the chat room. Zrobite asks, any plans for more Joe Ledger plus Nocturnal crossover stories? Which, of course, we did with, was it Vacation? Yeah, it was Vacation in your Joe Ledger anthology.
So, Joe Ledger Unstoppable.
Joe Ledger Unstoppable. Super fun. I don't know.
I'm down for it.
Yeah, me too.
There's absolutely no reason I would say no to that. I am actually considering doing another one of those anthologies. So that is something that may actually happen.
Okay.
And it's also something, if it goes into more of the horror element, that I would maybe even consider talking you into for Weird Tales, since I'm editing Weird Tales magazine now.
That would be cool. That'd be quite an honor. It's a lot like when I grew up reading Del Rey books, Anne McCaffrey, all those books, and then my Generations trilogy series was for Del Rey, and I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Weird Tales would be kind of the same thing, to see the name. No matter what point in your career you're at, I think once you see your name in certain magazines, you're like, get out of here. This can't actually be happening.
You know that you're going to be getting a request for Weird Tales. I just haven't decided which issue is going to be the one.
Okay.
Yet.
Okay. And let's see. I'm seeing if there's any other questions. Deadpet7 says, loving the chat, but you both by reading the comments, but somebody's got to go to bed. Got to go to bed. All right. So, real quick question. Yeah. Real question from the author's side. For people out there, there's a lot of aspiring writers who watch my stuff. The anthologies. Those, from a business perspective, those have to be good for you, because you take all that time away from the writing part and move it over to the editing part. And when you're editing, you can't be writing. So is that something that you have to do periodically to enjoy it, or you can't wait to get back to the next anthology?
I love anthologies. I just finished one. It's not a werewolf film. I just finished co-editing Aliens versus Predator, which will be out in December, I think.
Yeah.
November, December. I love anthologies. I try to do at least one a year. Sometimes I have done as many as 3 a year. In fact, my most recent anthology that just published a few months ago was Don't Turn Out the Lights, and the paperback of it came out today. It's a tribute to scary stories to tell in the dark.
Congratulations. You're on fire.
Thanks. But yeah, I've got a few more. I'm working on, I've got some pitches out for a couple, a UFO anthology, which should be a lot of fun, and a couple other odds and ends. I love anthologies. They are fun. Once you understand how it works, it's not as difficult as it was the first couple times I did one.
Okay.
And it's not that much different from editing a magazine, which, I'm editing Weird Tales now. So it's a similar thing. One thing I do with my anthologies that a lot of editors don't is I curate the entire anthology. I don't do open calls for the most part. I want to pick the writers I know can turn in consistently good stories, hit their deadlines, surprise the reader, and at the same time have a bit of fun,
Yep.
and who are not jackasses, because I tend not to work with other jackasses or with jackasses.
That's a big one. Let's get one last question from the chat room, and we'll wrap this up. Ollie Kirby asks, where would you rank American Werewolf in London, and say your top 5 or top 10 if it's not good enough to be in a top 5?
It's tied with, well, in terms of my all-time favorite werewolf films, it's number 2 after. I mean, because there's werewolf. What I find scary about werewolves, but in terms of the werewolf movies, I absolutely love. It's Dog Soldiers, American Werewolf, The Howling, Ginger Snaps, and Brotherhood of the Wolf.
Wow, that's a great lineup. Wolfen sneaks up there for me. Wolfen was a huge influence on my book Nocturnal because it's a very different werewolf movie. It's more like, it's not even necessarily werewolves for sure. You're never quite sure, but it's the whole concept of nature abhors a vacuum, and if there's a food source available, a predator will eventually move into that space. That's one of my top favorites.
And that's one of the rare cases in these where much as I love the movie, the book is so much better. Whitley Strieber did the book. I love that book so much, and I wish they had hewn closer to the book in making the film.
Okay, I'm gonna have to. I have not consumed that one. I'll have to do that
because it gets into the internal thought process of the pack. You actually know what the pack is doing and why they're doing. So really, really worth a read.
Let's see. We have. We'll do one more question for you. Shannon Chavaria asks. She's a big fan of both of us. I'm happy to have her here. She's curious if we have nightmares of the stories we're currently writing. She fell asleep listening to the new Joe Ledger, and it fucked her dreams up. So, do you have nightmares, sir?
It's funny. I used to have nightmares, but I long ago learned this meditation thing where I can first off remember my dreams in great detail, and I write them down if they're good, and I can also make myself dream something. If I can actually give myself almost like a story plot, and I'll dream it that night.
That's great.
It's so much fun. I've been doing it since I was 10.
Okay.
But there's one. The last time I had a true nightmare was about zombies. I was writing a zombie book called Dead of Night for St. Martin's Griffin, and the metaphor for zombies that I was using was inspired by what my father-in-law was going through. He was a brilliant jazz musician, great guy, and he was going through dementia.
Okay.
And I saw him leaving a bit every day, and also saw those horrible moments when he was aware of what his disease was doing, not only to him but to his family. So when I wrote Dead of Night, I made it so that when somebody became a zombie, their consciousness was still in the body, connected to all 5 senses, but not the motor control. So they were helpless passengers in a body that went out and destroyed everyone they loved. And that gave me nightmares. And interestingly enough, I later found out from George Romero that it was his favorite zombie novel of all time because of that subplot.
That is funny. I have very similar plot in my Sigler story, the thing called Passenger, and it's about the passenger virus, which is a very similar thing. It just hijacks your motor control, and this semi-sentient microscopic organism just drives your body around like a puppet, and you're trapped in there, seeing, hearing, tasting, all the gross stuff. And so that's that loss of control. I think I also have experienced dementia in my family. Once you see it, it's just, oh my gosh, you'd rather get eaten by a werewolf than go out like that.
I really would. I would rather be eaten by a werewolf than either go through dementia or see the ones I love, go through it. It is a real horror story.
Okay, last question. Promise the last question. Mike Werr says, what is Jonathan's weapon of choice to vanquish these hellhounds?
Okay, so I'm a big fan of swords. I've been doing kenjutsu, Japanese swordplay, since I was a kid, and I like my odds with a sword. Now, it depends on the werewolf type too, because in folklore, no special weapons are necessary to kill a werewolf. They can be killed by anything that kills a wolf.
Okay.
The whole thing about silver bullets and all that was only made for the movies.
Is that right?
Never existed in folklore. Okay. Yeah. Same with the full moon cycle. That's fiction, not in folklore. So if I were up against the folklore monsters, which are my favorites, I'm really good with a sword or any kind of knife. I like my odds.
Okay.
I don't want to have to outrun it because I'm older and heavy, but give me a sword, I will have, werewolf cold cuts in a dress.
At the very least, you get to die facing your enemy because you get to give it a shot.
He will know he's been in a fight.
Jonathan, as always, home run with you as a guest. Thank you very much for kicking this show off. The chat room is abuzz with people saying they like the new show and they enjoy you. Appreciate it as always, sir. And is there any last thing that you want to pitch or tell people where to go to get more stuff about you?
Well, you can always go to jonathanmaberry.com as long as you spell my last name right. It's M-A-B, not M-A-Y-B, M-A-B-E-R-R-Y.
Okay.
Links to everything, all my social media and everything. And you can find it about my werewolf fiction as well as my other stuff. But really treat yourself to Watch Dog Soldiers. Don't watch it while you're also looking at your phone or doing anything else. Sit down, as Scott suggested, turn the lights out, chill, watch the movie without a break. It is fan-friggin-tastic.
Yeah.
And watch it with a couple of friends who can be serious about really getting into a good horror film.
I will have to consider watching that with my wife, because I don't know if it'll scare her or not. I forgot to answer the question. If I get nightmares, almost never. When I do, it's the stuff I don't write about. It's crazy ghosts and stuff like that you can't, like, I have no chance of defeating this thing because it's not really here. But werewolves hopefully will give everybody else nightmares. Jonathan, thank you once again for being the first guest on the show. Appreciate it very much. And
thank you.
I will now say goodbye to you, sir, and we will go read up on Relentless. Good day, sir.
Right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
And thanks, Scott.
You betcha. All right, back to Maine. You can see up on the screen, there is Jonathan Maberry's newest book, Relentless, along with that short story anthology he just came out. Goodbye, Ollie Kirby, saying goodbye from Australia. My latest book is Mount Fitzroy, and that is book 2 in the Sun Symbol series. Book 1 is a little book called Earth Core. You guys can all check that out. Let's take one last look at what we got coming up. Next week, super excited, the guy who wrote The Rocketeer, you guys, and Defy Bloods, the recent Netflix movie directed by Spike Lee, is going to be our second guest on this show. And he's going to go old school, talking about an old creature called the Creep. So come prepared, because we're going to give you a little education on that, because these movies were like 1942, 1944, 1946. So you get to see a little slice of something different that's not up on the big screens or hasn't been there recently. I'm super excited. On the 30th of July, we're going to have Delilah Dawson, a killer author who has flourished in the Star Wars universe as of late. She is going to talk about a specific monster, Gamork, from the Neverending Story. Then we've got novelist Nicholas Sansbury Smith on August 6th, who writes one of my favorite series, Helldivers. He's going to go old school about the Terminator, the original Terminator, and what an influence it was on his brand new series, E-Day, which is out. This is the first week it's been out, so you can jump on book 1 if you want to do that. We love this guy here at Empty Set, and we can't wait to have him on. And then on the 13th, we have actress Rachel True, who has done an enormous amount of stuff and is an author with a book on the science of tarot, roughly. And that is out now. She'll talk about that. But of course, she was on the movie Half Baked, which is near and dear to me. And she was awesome on the original Craft. She is going to be talking about one of my favorite monsters. She picked this with no urging by me. And that, of course, is The Thing, the John Carpenter version. One of my all-time favorite movies. Might be in line for my second favorite all-time horror movie. I'm not entirely sure. But let's go back to Maine. That's it for this week. You are all fantastic. I hope you don't smell like decomposing flesh eaten by a werewolf, particularly if it passes through the system, because that's got to be a nasty, nasty smell. But that is it for this week, guys. I'm now going to sign off. Come on back next week, Friday, 4 p.m. Every Friday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, and I believe 11 p.m. GMT. That's why we're having a show a little bit earlier, so we can get some of our European fans to come hang out. We will talk to you all when that comes on. Until next week, don't have any nightmares.